everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video where today we are continuing the classic Doctor Who reviews with the beginning of the fourth Doctor's era. It's Tom Baker's era. It's time to review Robot. So yes, obviously my reviews have been a bit inconsistent and all over the place, shall we say, after I did the first 5 stories of John Pertwee's era and then kind of stopped doing that. Apologies again for that. University happened and it got a bit complicated, so they never really came together. But I'm hoping to at least start off again with the first few stories of the Tom Baker era, at least hopefully through season 12, and then we'll see where I get to after that, I think. But yes, you can be optimistic that at least I might get to the end of season 12 with the reviews at the very least. But yes, so Robot, a story that, as I say, starts off Tom Baker's era as the fourth Doctor, with the first part airing on basically New Year's Eve 1974 and then continuing into 1975. So Tom got quite lucky in that his first episode aired right at the end of 1974, so he just about gets into the bracket where he can say he was the Doctor from 1974 to 81 rather than 75. Pointless facts, but it's still a fact. Now, this is a story, of course, penned by Terence Dicks, who was the script editor through much of the John Pertwee era and worked very closely with producer Barry Letts, and kind of basically lied to the production team and said that, oh, it's the normal thing that the outgoing script editor is supposed to write the first story for the new Doctor as he's leaving and everything. And so he ended up doing it and wrote Robot, which is kind of a play on the old King Kong type film with the robot and the damsel in distress, and there's some parallels there, I think, that are sort of explored in some of the bonus features on the Blu-ray collection for this story, which is quite interesting and quite good to look at. But it's still a reasonably, not necessarily original story, but a reasonably good story, I think. I do find it quite entertaining how Terence Dicks just talks about how he nabbed stuff from this side, from this film, from this TV show, from this book, and it's like he just loves to grab ideas from different places and rehash them into a new Doctor Who story, which I don't think is always a terrible idea. Sometimes it probably works better than others, but I still feel like it works in this occasion fairly well. So we may as well start by talking about the Doctor, the fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, in his first ever performance, where I think you notice within 5 or 10 minutes the stark contrast between John Pertwee's third Doctor, particularly as I've obviously been watching it in the marathon form, and so have recently watched Planet of the Spiders and the whole of John Pertwee's era, to then suddenly jump into Robot and Tom Baker's Doctor. It's just such a complete difference in the character. He's so much more crazy and loony and all over the place and unpredictable and quirky and eccentric than what John Pertwee's Doctor was. He was very much more calm and measured in the most part, more the sort of suave Doctor that we're kind of used to, the action man, but also quite suave and calm in that sense. So, but I also think it works quite well as it's a very nice change-up. It shows that you can have the character portrayed in so many different ways and still really work very effectively as a performance. And I feel like after 5 years of John Pertwee, you needed something that really was going to shake things up and change things a lot. And it's immediately apparent in the early scenes where the Doctor's trying to prove that he's fit by cutting some brick in half, doing his jogging, changing into all these different outfits and things. It's just all a little bit crazy and all over the place and just not the sort of thing you would ever have seen from John Pertwee's Doctor, which I think is really, really great to just see that difference straight away. As a story, I don't think that Robot is an all-time classic particularly. It's still a reasonably interesting idea, the idea of this giant, or this big, at least initially big robot that's been created that some kind of crazy people want to use to blackmail the world into following all their demands, otherwise they're going to nuke the world, basically, is their overall plan, which is, I mean, they're sort of elitist people, part of this SRS elite group that basically think they should be the elite people ruling the world because they're the cleverest and the smartest, the scientific people who know what they're doing, and they have all these ideals they want to create to make the world better because the world's being destroyed, ecology's being ruined, and the environment's being damaged and all that, and it's like trying to get it back to normal, and so they want to use this robot that Professor Kettlewell's created to try and do that, and to go and steal the codes for all the nukes in the world, basically, so they can go and blow up the world. It's quite an interesting idea, and you do genuinely, I felt like, feel the stakes, particularly later on in the story when you've got the countdown before the nukes are all going to get launched, and it does get down pretty low, and you're of course, the Doctor's going to save the day in the end, but it's still, I don't know, there did just feel like some actual genuine tension in this story, which I always think is quite good. One of the things I did notice about this story is I felt at points it's a little bit slow and lacking in action scenes, particularly. I think sort of in episode 2 and 3 in particular, those kind of mid-episodes, it's after we've had the excitement of the new Doctor in episode 1 and all exploring his initial craziness and character, then we kind of get into the sort of just not as exciting stuff, I think, through episodes 2 and 3, where we're kind of trying to infiltrate the think tank place to try and find out where this robot is, who he is, the stuff with Professor Kettlewell. It's all interesting and kind of building the story, but it also isn't that exciting and action-packed, whereas when we get to episode 4, and it's obviously all the soldiers blasting away at the robots, and the bombs being blown up in front of the bunker, and nearly the world being blown up by the nukes, and then the robot getting giant, there's lots of more exciting and interesting stuff going on, I think, in that last last episode, which just kind of is what the story needed to complete it, because otherwise it was going to be quite a slow, less exciting story, I think. There is, of course, the interesting dynamic that's sort of pulled out straight away between Sarah Jane and the K1 robot. I know this is, of course, a play to an extent on King Kong, and the idea of, well, with Sarah Jane kind of trying to get the robot to kind of be a little bit more emotional, be a bit emotional, basically, and try and show that compassion that she's showing towards him, and trying to explain that that's the right thing to do, and it's okay to have emotion, and you shouldn't have to be forced to kill people and take all this. And he's sort of having an existential crisis, basically, this robot, which is quite entertaining to watch. And then the moment in the last episode where he kills Professor Kettlewell and then just goes off on a rampage thinking the only thing I can do is destroy the whole world and it's all going to be disastrous, and it's kind of all really falls apart in the end in terms of Sarah trying to calm down this robot when she's basically been the one person who's actually been able to help him and stop him from killing people throughout this story. And then that kind of all, well, he doesn't kill her obviously, but it all falls apart at the end, and they really do have to properly defeat the robot. The story does also introduce the character of Harry Sullivan, who then becomes the sort of third companion through season 12 in each story. And so noticeable in this story, he doesn't really have all that much to do. He's kind of the medical doctor at the beginning of episode 1, and sort of basically having the dialogue with the doctor as he's going a little bit loopy and crazy. He's sent off the think tank to do some sort of infiltrating in there, but we never really see much of him. There's literally about 2 or 3 shots where he's actually there, and that's it. And then he turns up at the end as well, and that's the lot, really. So I don't know, I sort of felt like I remembered he was in this story more than he actually was. I know, of course, he's one of the main companions for the rest of the series, so he's going to be much more heavily involved in that. But based purely on this story, there isn't really that much to go on his character, I think it's fair to say. He's sort of quite an old-fashioned chap, is probably the best way to put it. But he seems quite nice and friendly, and although I've seen obviously all the season 12 stories before, it was a long, long time ago, so I don't remember that well how his character kind of develops through the following stories. Although all I do know is from a production side, his role kind of became a bit redundant once they cast Tom Baker, a doctor who was actually young enough to be able to do all the action sequences that they didn't think he'd be able to, because they thought they'd cast somebody who's like 65 or something, I guess. One of my claims to fame in regards to this story is that I have been to Wood Norton, the place where most of the location filming is done. It also was heavily used in Spearhead from Space as well. Back when I was working at the BBC, part of my training, I went to the Wood Norton facility, which is certainly now is purely a BBC sort of shut down training base, basically. There's very little that's done there, but some of those shots I do recognise, some of the places there it does look a little bit familiar from when I went there a couple of years ago, so it's always quite nice to see locations you've actually been to, particularly in classic Doctor Who as well, not even just the new series. It's always quite a fun one. So yeah, that's my tiny little claim to fame, I guess. And so overall I feel like that Robot is a good start to the Tom Baker era. I don't think it's anything kind of groundbreaking, but I think it was an important story to establish this new different character of the Doctor. It's important to kind of have that pretty much final unit story. Of course, Terror of the Zygons happens, but it's very much just an extra bonus tacked on one, rather than this feels like properly the end of the Tom Baker era, of the unit era even. And that sort of moment at the end of the story where he's like, why do I have to stay here? Why do I have to do all these things? Why can't I just go off and fly around on adventures? And that's what this incarnation of the Doctor wants to do. He doesn't have that same connection to Brigadier and unit that the third Doctor did. And so I felt like that was really, really important for kind of establishing it's time for a change. It's time to move out of unit and out of Earth-based stories and really move on to new worlds and planets and adventures, which I think is just such a great way to set up what's going to happen throughout the era to come. But yeah, so that was Robot, a solid, if not amazing story, but a good one for Tom Baker's Doctor to establish a character and set up the rest of the era to come. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. Do let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Robot as a story, and what you think of Tom Baker's Doctor sort of after this first story and the initial startings of his character. I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. As always, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new video. Goodbye.